Last year, the YouTuber Super Eyepatch Wolf posted a video titled The Problem with Silent Hill 3, The Downfall of Team Silent. In that video, Super Eyepatch Wolf asserts that the design of Silent Hill 3 changed early in development as a result of pressure from Konami. He claims that the early designs for the game were going to be a more personal, introspective tale, more in the vein of Silent Hill 2. Konami may not have been happy with this early design because, and I know it sounds hard to believe now, but there were apparently many vocal fans of the first Silent Hill game who were upset that Silent Hill 2 had not continued the story set forth by the first game. So Konami mandated that Team Silent make Silent Hill 3 be more of a continuation of the first Silent Hill, and so Silent Hill 3 was rewritten as a direct sequel to the first game, and returned to the narrative of a cult trying to rebirth a demon god, or at least that's how the story goes according to Super Eyepatch Wolf. It's hard to believe, but when it was first released, Silent Hill 2 was not universally regarded as the gold standard of video game horror. You can look at middling contemporary reviews from publications like Gamespot and Game Informer. In those days, the series was perceived as being about occultism, and Silent Hill 2 was a stark deviation. Now, with the generation of gamers having grown up playing and loving Silent Hill 2, there's an effort, whether it's deliberate or not, to reframe the entire series as having always been about a haunted town torturing the guilty, even though 3 out of 4 of the original games are explicitly about a cult trying to rebirth its demon god, and repressed personal guilt is only featured in 1 of those 4 games. But that may not have always been the plan. If Super Eyepatch Wolf is correct, then Team Silent may have wanted to pivot the narrative focus of the series away from occultism and towards more personal stories like that in Silent Hill 2, though, importantly, not necessarily about repressed guilt or amnesia. I have a complicated relationship with the question of what is Silent Hill about. Readers of my personal blog will know that I've rigorously defended the idea of Silent Hill as a series being about occultism, and that new entries in the series should respect that history rather than trying to reframe the entire series and the nature of the town itself to be about a haunted town that summons people to face their hidden guilt. That being said, it isn't that I have a particular attachment to occult stories, even though it turns out that a lot of the games that I really love, such as Demon's Souls and Bloodborne, also have strong occult threads. I'm not tied to the idea of the town's power coming exclusively from occultism or black magic. I have no problem at all with the town simply being possessed by some vaguely defined mystical power that manifests the darkness in people's hearts. In fact, if you read my blog, that's pretty much exactly how I say it all works in my own headcanon. I also am definitely not opposed to more thoughtful, introspective stories. Silent Hill 2 is my favorite game in the series because of that thoughtful, introspective story. Rather, I found that all of the third-party developed Silent Hill games after Silent Hill 4 tend to be highly derivative of Silent Hill 2 and not particularly good. I've written quite a number of blogs about Silent Hill, and I invite you to check them out if you're interested. If you enjoy them, then I also invite you to consider supporting me on Patreon. The money that I earn would go towards maintenance of the blog and the production of further videos like this one. As I hit my funding goals, I also intend to make matching donations to a charity or nonprofit. When a new goal is hit, I'll put up a poll of several charities or nonprofits that are important to me, and I'll let my Patreons vote on which one of those they would like me to donate to this time around. I also encourage you to do your own blog or start up your own YouTube channel. Express yourself. Let your voice be heard. Perhaps someday I'll become your patron. Anyway, now that the shameless self-promotion is out of the way, Super Eyepatch Wolf does have some quotes and evidence to support the idea that Silent Hill 3 was originally intended to be a very different game. But there's not much, if any, information about what the actual story of that game might have been. Nobody on Team Silent has, as far as I know, talked about it, nor do we have a leaked design document like what we have for Silent Hill Cold Heart, the Wii exclusive that eventually transformed into Shattered Memories. With no real hints to go on, Super Eyepatch Wolf doesn't do much in the way of speculation as to what the original Silent Hill 3 might have been about.
that end. We'll never know what the alternate version of Silent Hill 3 could have been, but when you think about the ideas that are unique to the third game, an adolescent female protagonist and an unwanted pregnancy, and combine them with the concept of a town that traps people in their own personal horror from 2, along with Imamura's comments about even just how the original concept of the game was not likely to pass cert, it sure paints the picture of a game that could have been as shocking and original as its predecessors. But all that's ever going to be is speculation. We never got that game. What we got instead...
Now, I honestly don't have much more to say other than what Super Eyepatch Wolf has already said, or at least very strongly implied. But I do want to go that one extra step of going into a little bit more detail about the elements of Silent Hill 3 that I think may have still been held over from that original scenario. So I'm going to go one step further than Super Eyepatch Wolf. I am going to try to speculate what this original concept might have been. I want to emphasize that what follows is pure speculation pulled right out of my ass. I have no evidence or knowledge of Silent Hill 3's original design, nor do I know for sure that the game was substantially redesigned to begin with. I'm basically just assuming that Super Eyepatch Wolf is correct, and I'm running with it. I'll leave it to others to debate whether Super Eyepatch Wolf is correct or not. So do not take me as an authority on this subject, and do not take this video's content as gospel. We good? Alright, now let's talk about the Silent Hill 3 that might have been. As far as I know, Team Silent's members have not talked publicly about what this original concept might have been, if it is even true to begin with. So we don't really have anything to go on. In fact, pretty much the only thing that we do have to go on is the actual final version of Silent Hill 3 that ended up being developed and released and sold in stores. Many games that pivot their direction do still maintain themes and concepts from their original design. This is probably a result of sunk costs. The designers, artists, and programmers may have already spent person hours and money creating storyboards, concept art, game assets, code, and scripts, and maybe even a rapid prototype. Even if the direction of the game shifts dramatically, the team, or the publishing company that is fronting the bill, might want to keep as many of those storyboards, concepts, game assets, scripts, and prototypes as possible, so many of them might still be rolled into the final game's design in one way or another. So let's ask ourselves, what themes are present in the final release of Silent Hill 3? Well, one of the biggest themes is the idea of growing up. Silent Hill 3 is, in many ways, a tale of Heather's loss of childhood innocence. When she is thrust into the nightmare of Silent Hill and her father is murdered, Heather is forced to grow up very quickly and very suddenly. She goes from being an average teenage girl shopping at the mall without a care in the world, to being a hardened monster hunter and, incidentally, a savior of the world. The stress and pressures that are unique to being an adolescent girl are also present throughout the game. Now, I'm a 30-something-year-old cis-white male. I can't really speak to the experiences of a young woman. That being said, one of the artistic merits of video games as a medium is their ability to put the player in the headspace of the player character, regardless of differences in age, gender, creed, sexuality, or whatever. Silent Hill 3 gave me a little taste of what it's like to be a teenage girl. So I can still try to describe my takeaways from the game as best I can, even though I may not be able to personally relate to them. If I'm way off base on something, I'm sure someone will correct me in the comments. And if you can personally relate to this story, and you feel comfortable sharing and want to share, then feel free to do so in the comments. Heather, being a young woman, is not a simple, superficial decision. Silent Hill 3 isn't just a game with a young female protagonist, it is very much a game about a young female protagonist. Heather's femininity and age are both essential to the themes and motifs of the game. Motherhood and pregnancy are a major underlying theme in the narrative, and particularly in the visuals, and this is where things start to get really disturbing. The game's plot is that Heather is impregnated with a demon fetus without her knowledge or consent, and the whole game is about Claudia attempting to force Heather to give birth. It's, kinda rapey? Pregnancy and menstruation are also heavy motifs in the game's visuals. The whole game is very bloody and red. There are lots of fleshy tones, walls have animated textures of what appears to be blood flowing up and down them, and there are scenes of blood leaking out of sinks and out of bathtubs. In one case, Heather even becomes trapped in a hospital room while blood envelops her. While these could all be indicative of bodily harm or injury, the strong theme of pregnancy and birth also means that these aesthetic elements are probably meant to symbolize menstruation. We also have a lot of phallic imagery in the monsters. Just like how James is tormented by monsters with petite feminine forms, many of Heather's monsters are hulking phallic or masculine monstrosities that either pummel her with their phallic limbs, or other monsters just poke and prod at her with flailing limbs, while at least one type of monster will just outright tackle her and pin her down. Again, kinda rapey. Yeah, Silent Hill 3 also has nurses, but these are not nearly as sexually objectified as the ones in Silent Hill 2. For starters, they have faces. The nurses in Silent Hill 3 are likely there because of Alessa's past trauma, not necessarily because of anything from Heather's psyche. Heather also receives a lot of unwanted attention from creepy older men, whether it's her sneaking into a bathroom to get away from Douglas, or being gaslit by Vincent, or receiving creepy love letters from a stalker, or being pestered with unwanted phone calls from weird men. Heather is the subject of a lot of unsolicited male attention. It's possible that her relatively modest attire, at least for a video game heroine anyway, is an attempt to try to avoid such unwanted attention from men in her daily life. This doesn't mean that Heather has repressed memories of being raped or that she's been sexually assaulted or harassed or anything like that, but the risk of such violations is definitely forefront on her mind. This is apparent from the opening moments of the game when she threatens to scream in order to make Douglas leave her alone, and then climbs out through the bathroom window to get away from him. It is reinforced by her possession of a switchblade and a stun gun for self-defense. None of the male protagonists in the first 4 Silent Hill games started the game possessing weapons. Again, I want to reinforce the idea that Heather's gender and age are not superficial design choices. They are fundamental to the game's narrative and themes. This story cannot be told, nor can these themes be presented with a male protagonist. This game gives cis white males, like myself, a brief glimpse of the threats and traumas that many of our female peers and family members may have to deal with every day. Witnessing these themes of sexual harassment and assault from the point of view of a young, vulnerable woman contributes greatly to the horror of this game by grounding it and making it all feel much more real and threatening. At the end of the game, Heather goes on to swallow a pill that makes her throw up the demon fetus growing within her. The Aglophidus capsule that her father gives her could possibly be read as a metaphorical day-after contraceptive pill.
Looks like God didn't make it.
One other possible bit of abortion imagery that stood out to me in a recent playthrough, but I may be completely stretching with this one, is the use of a coat hanger to pull down a ladder in the Otherworld Mall. Is the use of a coat hanger here incidental, or is this a deliberate attempt to invoke imagery of a coat hanger abortion? Something that women used to do when abortions were illegal and which was very dangerous. So what does all of this add up to? Well, maybe I'm projecting some of my own political biases, but it looks an awful lot to me like Silent Hill 3 is essentially a game about aborting a forced and unwanted pregnancy, to the complete disregard of the cruel religious fundamentalists who insist that the pregnancy must be carried to term regardless of the wishes and well-being of the mother.
What is this?
I therefore submit that the original story concept for Silent Hill 3, if there actually was one, might have been a deeply introspective and personal tale of a teenage girl who is dealing with the trauma and shame of having an underage, unwanted pregnancy, possibly as a result of rape, and that she either has already had or is contemplating having an abortion. All the pieces are there in the final game. Team Silent just dropped the more introspective allegorical angle and inserted the cult god concept from the first game as a more abstract metaphor. This theme could take the game in two different directions. The first direction is that the game may have kept some of the themes and concepts of the final product, specifically a villain, possibly a religious figure like Claudia, who wants to force Heather to have the baby against her will. In this case, the game would likely have a pro-choice message, with the idea of being forced to carry the baby to term being associated with the villain, and with Heather expelling and killing the fetus being the game's victory state, just as is the case in the final game. The other direction would be more derivative of Silent Hill 2, with Heather having maybe already terminated the pregnancy or having committed herself to doing so, and then confronting any guilt that might be associated with that decision. Maybe she had the abortion and repressed the memory like James did in Silent Hill 2, or maybe she didn't. This direction would have put Silent Hill as a franchise firmly in the direction of being about characters confronting their deepest, darkest traumas, with the town acting as a sort of purgatory, rather than being the cult-driven franchise that it ended up being. But, I don't know, then again, they went on to make Silent Hill 4 about the cult as well, so, half and half? This latter direction also may have ended up having more of an anti-abortion message behind it, depending on how many endings the game would have and how different those endings would be from each other, and which of the outcomes may or may not be presented as good endings. I don't know what the political biases were at Team Silent or what kind of messages they might have wanted to send, but considering the general disdain that the Silent Hill series shows towards religious authorities, the casting of the fundamentalist Claudia as a villain, and Heather's baby being a literal demon, I lean more towards Team Silent probably being in the pro-choice camp. But then again, Silent Hill 2 didn't really pass judgment on James regarding his euthanasia of Mary, so Team Silent left the question of, is this euthanasia or is it murder, up to the players. So this hypothetical Silent Hill 3 that I've described may have similarly left the morality of Heather's abortion up to the judgment of the players, with endings that could go either way. Maybe the different ending triggers, similar to Silent Hill 2, would profile the player based on how you play and what choices you make during the game, in order to give you an ending that would most closely align with your own personal feelings towards abortion. Or maybe the ending given would be diametrically opposed to your personal views in order to challenge them and perhaps freak you out a little bit more by presenting you with something that the developers think you would find very uncomfortable. This supposed story of a rape and pregnancy could also maybe explain the presence of some of Silent Hill 3's earlier, more filler-y levels. One of the biggest criticisms of Silent Hill 3's final release is that the subway, the sewer, and the office building levels do very little to progress the game's story. They feel more like padding than an integral part of the game. Every location in Silent Hill 2 was important to that game's plot, and moved some plot thread forward or contributed towards the characterization of James. The apartments, for instance, introduced us to Angela, Eddie, Laura, and Pyramid Head, and Rosewater Park introduced us to Maria. The trek through Silent Hill and travel through the bowling alley and Heaven's Night strip club give the player an opportunity to interact with Maria, and how we treat her is a strong determinant towards that game's ending. It also gives us further characterization for Eddie and Laura. The hospital gives us insight into how James perceived Mary's illness, the frustration that he felt, and the depression that Mary felt. The prison strongly represents James's sense of guilt, while the labyrinth represents all the characters' cognitive dissonances regarding what they've done. And lastly, the Lakeview Hotel is where we find out what really happens and get closure for the story. Every level in Silent Hill 2 is tightly focused around a central theme or idea. Heck, even the transitional levels in which you walk back and forth across the town in between the major levels of Silent Hill 2 is not meaningless filler. In addition to providing backstory about the history of the town, the condition of the town itself represents James's crumbling mental state and how his delusional mind is trying to piece his psyche back together. The deeper he falls into his delusion, the darker, more decrepit, and more openly antagonistic the town itself becomes. That is definitely not so much the case with Silent Hill 3, as that game really doesn't even begin until Heather gets home and finds Harry murdered. I can see the mall as being representative of Heather's age. Malls were popular hangout spots for teens during the 90s and early 2000s. Are they still? I don't know. It's been a long time since I've been a teenager. The subway is a location that Heather travels through on a near daily basis that she probably knows is very dangerous. Other than that, there isn't much that happens, and I never got a strong sense of theming from the subway. The sewers feel like completely unnecessary padding. And other than introducing the player to Vincent, the office building doesn't really have much going on either. Quite frankly, Team Silent could have moved Vincent's office to somewhere in or near the mall, and then cut out the subway, sewer, and Hilltop Center levels without really losing much of the narrative at all. Maybe keep an abridged subway as a transitional area between the mall and Heather's apartment, and they should definitely have found another place to insert the glutton monster that blocks the Hilltop Center exit, because I think that's one of the cooler set pieces in the game. But, I mean, those levels could be cut entirely, and it wouldn't really make that big of a difference. In the original design, however, it's possible that the subway, sewer, and Hilltop Center levels may have had more relevance to the plot and themes. Subways have a reputation, especially in Japan, for being a place where lots of sexual assaults happen. Further, the fact that Vincent is found in a mental health clinic in the Hilltop Center could also be a clue as to his original purpose in the story. Perhaps in the original design, Vincent isn't the treasurer of a cult. Perhaps instead he was a psychologist or counselor. Perhaps he works for a religious organization, gaslighting and guilt-tripping Heather into thinking that her pregnancy is her fault, and that she is bound by religious dogma to carry the pregnancy to term. I don't know.
You come here and enjoy spilling their blood and listening to them cry out. You feel excited when you step on them and snuff out their lives.
Are you talking about the monsters?
Monsters? They look like monsters to you? Oh no. Don't worry. It's just a joke.
Still not sure what relevance the sewer level would have had. Perhaps that level would have always been filler, no matter what the game was about. Or maybe the plot wasn't going to be about rape at all. Maybe Heather is on the run with her unborn child from an abusive husband or boyfriend. Perhaps Douglas is tracking her down on behest of said baby daddy. Maybe she is contemplating abortion, but the main gist of the story is about escaping an abusive or toxic relationship. There's a lot of directions that these ideas could have gone. Or maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe the original scenario had nothing to do with rape or abortion. Maybe it would have somehow been something even darker. After all, that same interview that was the inspiration for this whole speculation train to begin with also said that Team Silent was holding back that original scenario for a possible future game that also never got made because Konami shut them down. Perhaps Silent Hill 5 would have seen the original plan for 3 resurrected in all its disturbing next-gen glory. So now that we've explored the possibilities of what Silent Hill 3 maybe could have been about, we come to the million-dollar question. Would this hypothetical version of Silent Hill 3, with its more personal and introspective plot, potentially about a hot topic socio-political issue, have been a better game than the version of Silent Hill 3 that ended up on store shelves? Silent Hill 3 is by far the most technically refined game in the series, with visuals and effects that were mind-blowing at the time and which still hold up incredibly well to this day. It is loaded with some of the most interesting, creative, and terrifying set pieces that Team Silent ever came up with. Most importantly, Heather is a strong protagonist who, I feel, stands tall and proud as one of the best examples that video games have of a strong female heroine, and one whose femininity is actually integral to the story being told. But Silent Hill 3 definitely has its share of significant problems. As I mentioned, the first half of the game is dominated by levels that feel very meandering and fillery. Heather's head turns to look at doors and dead enemies, which leaves the player uncertain if you've collected every item in the room and is a really stupid design decision. Heather's wide variety of high-powered weapons pivoted the game in a more action-oriented direction that undercuts the sense of vulnerability that dominated the first two games, and which is a staple of the survival horror genre. That wide arsenal of weapons, and the inclusion of a bulletproof vest, also forces all the monsters to become bullet sponges that turn every combat encounter into an obnoxious grind. And the instant death pit traps are perhaps one of the worst ideas ever put into a survival horror game. Would the original concept for Silent Hill 3 have maintained all of the positives of the final game and replaced the negatives with even more positives? Or would the faults in the final game's design still have been present? Or would it have ended up being derivative of Silent Hill 2 and ended up being too predictable and stale for its own good, in much the same way that I feel the post-Team Silent games were? Would Heather have simply repressed some sin that she feels subconsciously guilty for, whether it's about having aborted her child, as I proposed, or something else entirely?
But I know there's something. Something I've been running from and forgot for a long time.
The post-Team Silent Hill games fail to hit home with many players and critics, in large part because the forced twists all felt predictable and rote. These games lacked the clever and nuanced foreshadowing and symbolism of Silent Hill 2, in large part because they had to support so many mutually exclusive endings that retcon and obfuscate the entire game. As such, the player can paradoxically both see the twist coming from a mile away, and also still feel like the twist comes out of nowhere. Might Silent Hill 3 have fallen into this same trap? It doesn't have to be so. Post-Team Silent Hill games aren't the only games that are derivative of Silent Hill 2. We also have the example of something like, say, the first Dead Space. Dead Space came out several years after Silent Hill 2, and also featured a "your wife was dead all along" plot twist. But Dead Space handles that plot twist completely differently than Silent Hill 2. Much like in Silent Hill 2, the actions of the other characters, and eventually of the protagonist himself, begin to erode the player's sense of trust in what Dead Space is showing them, and makes you begin to doubt whether or not the player character is sane. But this time, instead of being about the protagonist's secret repressed guilt, Dead Space uses these same narrative concepts and plot points to mess with the player's sense of agency and will, a narrative trick that is unique to video games compared to other non-interactive media. Is the character taking these actions because he wants to, or because he is being manipulated, or because he is flat out delusional or crazy? That feeling that you cannot trust your own senses, and that possibility that your free will is being taken from you, is part of Dead Space's horror. More importantly, it's a narrative theme that is original to Dead Space, and not recycled from Silent Hill 2. Well, I guess it's not completely original. That old plot about a character feeling guilty over the death of a loved one does not have to feel stale and repetitive. But it is a tough uphill climb if you're going to try it, because you do have to compete with the standards set by Silent Hill 2. At the end of the day, we'll never know if Silent Hill 3 could have been an even better game than the one that we all played, because sadly, that original idea for the game will probably never see the light of day.
What a nightmare.